Hello again, Internet. I'm back for another day of Odinmade Hero, the programming series where I learn how to make a game from scratch by watching Casey Muratori do it in Handmade Hero, made in C and C++, while I do it in Odin. And yesterday was a pretty good day, other than Windows imploding, but it's not exactly a new phenomenon, so no point in worrying too much about it. We were trying to move our game in progress into fully 3D space. So we had a lot of velocity and position and acceleration members of different structs and different variables as well. They were all in 2 dimensions, and we wanted to expand those to 3 dimensions. But of course, we got this little problem here now that we weren't able to solve by the end of the day, and that's really just because Casey didn't quite have enough time to solve it either. So we're going to jump right in here and watch him debug it and see if maybe we can whoops, what kind of timing is that? So make sure I don't have another phone call, or at least, yeah, silence my phone. So anyway, yeah, we're gonna jump right in, and Casey's gonna try and figure this out. I think what I was thinking, right, is that we have an issue with this code here. What was it? Map into chunk space or something like that. Right here, chunk pose from tile pose. This seemed too easy to just do this Handmade product here and then get the chunk space mapping that we want based off of the world, ab style, X, Y, and Z. So we're just going to see how this goes, and maybe this has nothing to do with the issue, but we know it's at least related to just the positioning of mapping entities in and using 3D coordinates. It's just kind of mess things up a bit. So we'll get that ironed out and keep moving forward.
All right. So, hello everyone, and welcome to Handmade Hero, the show where we code a complete game from scratch on Twitch, live with no libraries, no engine. Everything is coded from scratch, because when you do something from scratch, everyone knows it tastes better. This is like when you make the chocolate chip cookies and they're fresh and awesome, okay? Not the store-bought ones that are all crufty and moldy, and nobody wants that. Nobody wants a licensed cookie, okay? You don't want all of that weird, you know, the artificial flavors and colors. You can't even read the label. You're like looking at it, I don't know what that's in there. You don't want that, right? You don't want that giant build soup. That's not gonna work out for you. But from scratch, that's the only way we do it here. It's delicious. It's just like Mama used to code, and that's how we're doing it here on Handmade Hero. Anyway, we have some debugging to do today, because we made some changes yesterday and didn't have time to go through and debug them, and so I want to go ahead and do that because I hate it when we know we've got some debugging to do and haven't done it yet. So if you want to follow along with that debugging, and along with that chocolate chip cookie, metaphorically speaking, today is day 72. So if you have pre-ordered the source code and downloaded that, you want to unzip day 71 source code, because that's what I'm starting with right now. So if you want to follow along with it, that is the way to do it. So let's take a look. Some people on the forums were writing in what they suspected the bugs to be, and they might be right. We don't know. Like I said, I had to stop last night. I did not have time to step through and debug it. So we don't know what we actually did. We don't know what might be wrong. But somebody did send in one bug that's definitely a bug, whether it's our bug or not. It's definitely a bug, so let me go take a look at it here. I will point out to you. Yeah, so when we were doing our cut and pasting yesterday, we had one cut and paste problem, which is we have not yet checked the Z coordinate for our rectangle 3s, right? Again, there's probably tons of bugs in our math library, just to be clear.
I guess I should really make sure that that's not an issue with our code. I kind of sat here a while and made sure to actually verify that a lot of that stuff was correct, but it looks like I did not actually do this properly, so there's that. Got the same problem as Casey here. And I mean, maybe that just fixes our problems, but I doubt it. Yeah, I didn't think so. So there you go. But I did see that we fixed this, or I remember us fixing this, because now it's just adding and subtracting a vector 3 for the radius. Same thing for the center dim and center half dim stuff, like all the rest of this, right? If it's a rectangle 3, it uses vector 3s. It's pretty straightforward. So I guess that was the only change that stands out at a glance here that I didn't make at the time.
Because, like I said, we're not really concerned super much about bugs at this point. We're just trying to do our architecture stuff. When it gets time to really sort of get down to it, and we have everything in place where we want it, we'll probably do more sort of testing and battle hardening of some of this stuff. So yeah, we've got some bugs in it, but when someone points them out, it's good to fix them. This is obviously one of them. We were not checking the Z coordinate here. Is for our is in rectangle. You can see that most of the rectangle code is not actually based at all on actual elements. That's the only one that is. So when we change when we change rectangle dimensions, when we went from 2 to 3, that's the only thing that really had to change. It seems like everything else is pretty much just in terms of the underlying vectors. It doesn't really have to change. So there's that. The other thing that someone wrote in and pointed out, which is also a bug, is inside our world code. Yesterday we were just kind of going through again, and part of that giant change, removing everything and going directly to 3-dimensional everywhere, was that when we were doing sort of where is it at here? The thing that we were using only for temporary world building, it was this chunk position from tile position, this thing right here. When we were doing our multiplication to multiply out where stuff was in tile space, we were using chunk dim in meters, where really it's supposed to be tile side meters, right? Because these are in tiles, not chunks, that we wanted to do here. And so that was actually making the world, it would make the world much more sparse, because every time we thought we were putting things kind of at tile boundaries. And again, we don't have tiles anymore, so this was just a positioning aid, so we could still kind of make some tile-based stuff before we go and do something more complicated. But it's definitely a bug.
Okay, so right here, or no, down here. Yeah, so I just made that change in line with Casey, but maybe that was the only issue here. I see. So yeah, that's not gonna work. What is the right way? So like, if this did know ahead of time, because it's using an intrinsic, it doesn't know to like splat it into a vector 3. So you know what the move probably is here is to just make a new variable, have it be a v3, and then splat it that way, and then I think we can just pass that in like that. And then maybe that fixes the problem. But that still seems too easy to me. I don't know. In fact, that's going to cause an assertion here, so we'll see if Casey runs into the same thing.
So yeah, I guess this is no longer a Hadamard product either at the moment, because this is actually just going to be multiplying this vector by scalar. That's about it. And let's take a look here. Okay, so that's two.
Okay, I did that totally wrong then. I guess I'll wait and see what happens on his end.
Bugs that people wrote in and found on the forums. Kind of nice to have. It's kind of like having a giant.
What? I don't understand why. How did I get muted? I did something. My brain's just a little bit jumbled up. I did something very wrong. I meant to like maybe go back to my code screen here, and then I went back to Casey's, but then I didn't go back to my code, and then muted myself. Anyway, all I was saying was that I don't know if that's the only issue. I guess I'll just go ahead and make that change, because clearly that was just wrong thinking on my part. And in fact, yeah, I mean, why would you need to do a Hadamard if every element is the same, right? So that makes a lot more sense. Did I fit all that on one line? Not quite. So I think this is just producing the same result, and we're still gonna hit an assert. That's okay, I just want to make sure. Oh no, we didn't get an assert, but the issue is still there. So something is still messed up, but at least we're not hitting that assert anymore. That's good.
Set of code reviewers who just like look for bugs all day in your code. It's kind of a real nice bonus of doing all this stuff live is and having the source code available, right? Is this like you kind of get free debugging services. It's kind of cool. Anyway, but so I don't know if that will actually fix the problems, the initial bugs we were having. It might not. And so, well, for some reason it looks like changing that, because we were not getting this yesterday, it looks like changing that was causing a problem with our map.
And I just noticed, okay, so he hits that assert like he should, but I failed to notice that when I backed that change off, we were still using the wrong member of the world. So now if I build and run, we're going to hit that assert again, right? Yeah. Okay. All is well.
The chunk space call it as well, so I don't know what that's about. That seems a little bit odd. Why is it complaining? Well, sorry, I'm pretty thirsty. Let's take a look at what we computed here. Get a little warmed up here. All right, so we have an offset, which is going to be whatever, what is this actually computing? X, Y, and Z. No, that's not what I wanted to view. I wanted to view this. We're in the wrong space here. That's what I wanted to view. 132 is the offset. What is our tile relative? This is just in our thing to map back to our canonical coordinates. Our tile relative is still, yeah, so this is another one of those once the things get large. So you remember I said this yesterday, in fact. I was like, when we were writing this, I was like, well, we can take advantage of mapping a chunk space and just do it that way, but it's going to be a precision problem. Well, this is exactly the precision problem I was talking about, right? As these numbers get larger, the precision is going to go down, and we end up in this circumstance where it's having trouble figuring out, which tile it goes in. But which tile chunk it goes, I should say. But we don't super care about that right now. But what I do want to say, just again, is like, eventually what I think we're going to want to do for building the world, we're going to have to do the same thing we did for simulating the world. Since we want to be able to build really huge worlds, what we want to be able to do is just build a local region doing everything in float, and then move that region over. So like when we do, based on rooms, or we sort of say, here's an area that we're making, and we make that area, and then we can sort of move our focus over somewhere else, and then do, again, all of the stuff around a local coordinate origin. And that, again, is just to let us scale to like these really, really huge worlds, which, again, we don't necessarily know that we need, but just something I wanted to show how to do on the stream, because it's more complicated than just throwing everything in a float and then just never letting the world get big enough to care. And it may let us do some fun stuff, like allowing you to generate a game that'll take you a year to play. And
what a great
somebody
feature.
would do it. You know that if we shipped a game that took a year to play, there'd be a player who would not only do it, but stream the whole thing, right? So who knows? You know why?
Hey, look at what I'm doing right now, to his exact point. I mean, I'm sure there is a game of that nature out there, right? There's got to be, where you're like, it's just never ending. I mean, even 3 months is a lot, and that's how like Rust works, right? Like a game of Rust, they reset the map on a server every 3 months or something like that. Or is it the same thing with the Tarkov? I guess a lot of FPS games in general, they've gone with like that seasonal thing. But not every, like it's one thing where if it's like a battle royale map, and then a game only, like one round only lasts an hour. But if it's like Rust, you're building bases, and then once you go offline, somebody could log in and attack your base. So you want to have like a big group of people who can be logged on at all hours of the day. It's an extremely unhealthy kind of relationship to have with a game, but it's also rewarding in a very like parasitic way, because like you're cooperating and collaborating with other people that have the same vested interest in not having their your base raided, all this stuff. So I mean, there's totally that type of person out there, and then there's just other people like me that are insane and want to stream programming. There's something for everybody out there.
Why fight it? Why fight it? Just do the code and let it go. So I think we don't super care about that. We can just expand our epsilon for now, but that's really, and we already have the to do about it, which basically says we're going to have to solidify this. We should be able to, when we do our recanonicalize, we should be able to really get that epsilon down to essentially nothing once we are not relying on the build world stuff, because we're always going to be around that local origin, and we should be able to make it so it's really not that bad. But for now, that's definitely the case, that we're going to run into those. And I don't know how bad we're going to run into them. Let me double check to make sure that's, yeah. I just want to make sure that that's not something else, but see what the chunk dim is here. Chunk dim. Actually, just look at the chunk dim divided by 2. Yeah. Wow, that's off by a lot. That's off by like 0.01, right? That's just a really, really large error. But yeah, I don't think there's anything bad going on there. I really just think you can't build a world that goes out that far and expect to get that level of error there. Is that even going to be enough? I don't know if that'll be enough. Yeah, so maybe that's something I have to do. Oh, well, all right. So I guess it was just that fact that we were spreading the world out.
No kidding. Okay, I would not have expected that. That's pretty amazing to be able to ditch that much code and have it just work. But it means I got to change. Where is that epsilon? Just make it nice and small. Was that all he did? Looked like that was all he did. Yeah. Oh no. something went horribly wrong there. I think we jumped out of the the chunk space that we were simulating, which is no good. And you can still see that my the jump is broken. It's very broken, because it doesn't look like the hero is coming back down to the ground. He just kind of incrementally goes up, but it's not being represented here, like in front of us. But you can see if I just keep pressing jump, excuse me. I don't know if I'm getting sick or I've just been talking too much and my voice is going, but looks like everything else is fine. The collision table changes I made still working just fine, so that's awesome. Well, I guess I'll go ahead and get rid of all of this code, which is now superfluous. So we just ditch that. We ditch this, and I don't know if he got rid of this to do. I guess I'll leave it in until I'm convinced we don't need it.
That was it. Everything else was fine. We looks like we did everything else okay, as far as I can tell from here anyway. Looks about right to me. Awesome. So we'll have to do a little bit of work with that. Apparently you can jump up over the world now. Check this out. When I'm able to kind of go up into the next tier and then land back down. We'll have to take a look at our Z handling. So our Z handling is not quite right yet. That's for sure. So we'll have to take a look at that. But that's okay. That's what we're supposed to be doing currently. Anyway, that was awesome. I don't know why. It's kind of weird. It's like you jump twice and do it. All right, so let's take a look at that. Let's take a look at that. That's pretty funny, and I want to see what's going on there. As you can see, we also, on our little to-do thing here, we've got some other things that we want to do with Z, so I think we'll just kind of spend some more Z time. I want to take a look at what's going on here with this particular bug. I know that we hastily moved the processing for the Z equations of motion, right? We moved those we rolled them essentially into the rest of the computations for the equations of motion. So they operate exactly the way that they used to operate, right? And so the way that we did that was we went in here and we made the acceleration of the guy be negative 9.8, which is negative 9.8 meters per second squared. That's gravity, right? It's just gravity. And then what we did is we just rolled that into the acceleration and allowed it to get computed along with the acceleration that was going on in the horizontal plane. And that seems okay. I don't think there's anything strange going on there, it doesn't look like. So I think we can probably say that that's fine for now. Then what we did at the end is we took a look to see whether the location of the guy was below the sort of the low bar, right? Below the, excuse me, below the ground, if you will, which is 0. And if it was, we would set it back up to 0. And again, that seems fine. Nothing particularly weird there. But one thing that we didn't sort of do too much about was the thing where you actually do the jump code. I believe, where is our jump code? There it is. I believe that our Con-Hero DZ handling may be a little weird. Is it? No, it looks good. So what's our DZ is 3, so we'd be going up. So we're flat setting the velocity of our guy to basically go up whenever that spacebar goes down. If that's the case, I would have expected the jumping to look roughly the same as it was looking, so it's a little bit odd that it's not, and I'm not sure exactly what's going on there. So I kind of think we may have to step through here and just take a little look at what's going on, because I can't intuit anything obvious that's going wrong there. Again, we pull out the Z here, right, in order to get the entity Z. We use meters to pixels as we were before, and we just kind of roll that into the Y coordinate, and that's how we're having him jump up and down. But he used to go much further, and so now I'm wondering why he isn't. And so let's just go ahead and see what happens the first time through. That seems pretty reasonable to me. So, no, that all seems fine. So, and then I guess we also have the other bug to look at, which I'm going to look at separate. I'm going to look at after this one, which is why you're able to kind of push yourself up into the next Z bracket and not go back down. I guess that would happen if the jump height, if you could get high enough in the jump to go up, then really this, I mean, technically this right here would do it, right? Because if you can jump, let me draw this out.
Devil said, I wish I could double jump to escape this mortal plane. I mean, you would just get into the next mortal plane. You know, what you want and what's happening here in the game. That analogy doesn't fly. But like, I guess at least in the game you could respawn. So there's that. Oh, that's silly.
Hello. There we go. So the thing I'm thinking about here is just, we do, that is what would happen. The jump code would do exactly what I just said. In the case where you imagine, all right, this is a side view. And here is the current tile, abs tile Z. So this is like, this is our abs tile Z that we're on. right? We're in this chunk, right? I should actually say abs.g. We can just say our chunk z, right? So we're in this chunk right now. And here is another chunk, right? Well, when we jump up, right, our guy leaves the sort of the baseline, which is 0. And if he were to cross up high enough that he went above the next chunk z, right, chunk z plus 1, then when he came back down, we're just checking for his position, his relative position, meaning his position relative to the camera, right, to go less than 0. And if his position relative to the camera goes less than 0, then we just go ahead and say, oh, okay, he stops, right? He stops here. So you would always jump up and land on the thing. It would be kind of like, a Mario situation, or not Mario, I guess Mario didn't necessarily do this, but in a platformer where you're standing on something and you jump up and then you can pass through this thing, this other platform, but then when you land on it, you go up like that. That's essentially what's going on here, because we're not preventing you from jumping up through things and then you're landing on them. And we don't.
It seems like the problem's even worse than that, because when we jump, I'll just run it again to demonstrate. And he's probably already going to point this out or notice it, but like what I see is that if I jump in here, it doesn't seem like I'm coming back down to the ground properly. Like I might be getting rendered correctly, but you can see that like no amount of waiting in between jumps actually has me come back down to the level where I would be at the baseline. It seems like our place in Z in the world just keeps going up every single time we jump until finally we jump out of it. We're never coming back down at all. We're never descending at all in Z. So if I just hold it, it seems like it's not like I'm holding it too long initially and then I'm in the next plane. Like it's just, there's a finite amount that we're actually able to travel up in Z with the space bar before we're just out of that plane. We're never drifting back down at all. So it's like every single new increment in Z is like its own little platform, using his analogy that he's giving here.
Don't even check, right? All we're doing is checking for Z less than 0. Again, that's the camera relative Z. All we're doing is checking for the Z less than 0, and since we're only checking for the Z less than 0, what that means is that it doesn't even matter if there's anything there, right? You don't have to be landing on something. You just have to go above the 0 line and come back down. So probably that's roughly what's happening, I'm guessing. But that still doesn't explain why it looks so weird when you do it. Like, I don't understand why we're getting that sort of behavior where it's that little tiny jump like that. It just doesn't look right. So I want to debug that first and find out what's going on there, and maybe that will also be a clue to what's going on. I want to take a quick look too for how we update the camera here. I just want to see how that worked. So it looks like we are just using the chunk Z for the camera. So right now we're not even really doing Z tracking with the camera other than the chunk Z. So I feel like that shouldn't have really been a problem. Oh, nope. That's the problem right there. Yeah, so we actually are. We're fully tracking the guy's motion with our Z. So really, when you were jumping, you were seeing the offset of the guy and then the camera was following him up. So that's actually what was happening, and that's the cause of the entire problem. If we didn't do that, I think we'd be okay. Well, actually, I guess I can't quite do that yet since we didn't write that code yet. So let me just comment out the camera following. And now we should have the ability to jump the way we were jumping before. And we do. Yeah, looks about right. Yeah. So, okay. I'm not sure exactly what we want to do with that. For the moment, we can do this. And then, because really what we want to do is we want to go actually work on our Z stuff anyway. So,
hold on. Sorry, I'm just navigating a bunch of different windows, and also my voice is going out, so that's great. All right, so that's good. Especially after making those changes to 3D, I don't want to see. I'm testing basically with every single change he's making. What's kind of neat now, in fact, I don't know that his would even do this. I guess I was jumping for too long there. I don't know that his code would even do this, but you can see that when I'm throwing the rock, because I did set its delta position to be a vector 3, it actually kind of like hops out. Or maybe that's just because it starts where the bottom of the player is, which is basically where whatever the player's P is, whatever the player's position is. It kind of drops out there, but it doesn't. We don't have to jump very high at all before we wind up. Basically, you can see we're just going up and up through chunks now. We're way above where we should be. And then it looked like he was. So if we go over here, well, oh, I see. He's setting the XY alone. I see, because the offset is now a Z. So maybe that has nothing to do with the sword, and it's just the sword just kind of dumps out of the sword, right? The rock dumps out of the player as it's being thrown, just at whatever the elevation of the player is. So maybe that has nothing to do with the sword request object, right, being a vector 3 now. I'm not sure. But I think his will behave the same way, in which case it's not related. But anyway, so now we just want to set the X and Y of the new camera P off of the stored positions X. What is it? The offset X and Y? I think that's right. What is it? Just new camera P? Oh, it's both off of the offset. Okay. And so now, oh geez, what in the world just happened? That doesn't seem right at all.
So it's possible that we could do a thing where we kind of do we do only the X and Y coordinates. Of course, these are world positions here, so we can't do that directly. But what we could do is something more like, you know, this sort of thing, where we take the chunk X and we do that one, chunk X, so on. Actually, you know what I could do too? I could just save the Z, cam Z offset, and grab off whatever that actually is, right? So here's offset.z. And then I can go ahead and just say, you know what, the new camera P does equal the stored P, but then we restore its offset Z to whatever it used to be, right? Like so. And that would prevent the camera from tracking us in Z. And then we're back to, you know, what we were doing before. Now we should still be able to, yeah, there we go. We should still be able to virtually jump up a level by just keep jumping, because remember.
Okay, so that is a good deal better, I would think. So we get the new camera P, and then we override the offset. Probably could have left that old code in there, but we'll just do it the way Casey is doing it to make life easier. And so then that, like you just said, gets us back to having the same problem. Well, having one less problem to deal with, which is that the camera was like tracking, and therefore it was like drawing all the entities up from wherever the camera's origin was, you know, relative to whatever the camera's origin was. But the second we get out of that chunk, those entities aren't there anymore. We're not polling them anymore, and so they go away. But looks like everything else is good. We can still fly out of there. Sweet.
Right? Like so. And that would prevent the camera from tracking us in Z. And then we're back to, you know, what we were doing before. Now we should still be able to, yeah, there we go. We should still be able to virtually jump up a level by just keep jumping, because remember, we don't cap your jump height, you have infinite jumps. So I feel like we should still be able to do that reliably, and we can. And that, again, just moves us up one layer. All right, so that all makes reasonable sense, I think. Nothing particularly weird going on there. Excuse me. But now we get down to some harder work here. We kind of got to think about some of these things. I have to admit, I kind of want to do this one. I know that it really, I don't even know why. Like, it's one of those obsessive things. It's like, why do we even care about that at all? It doesn't even make any sense. I kind of just want to do it just because I had said it was a puzzler. And then it's like we solved it without even realizing it, and I just want to do it. So I kind of feel like I'm just going to do that because I want to. I don't have any other reason. I don't have any other reason. I just want to see if we can do it. So if you remember, when we first did this, I was like, well, you know, we have these world positions, which is saying where guys are and everything. And then we store the entities, we store where they are in the world via these, you know, these world's entity block structures or whatever, right? And if you know what, if you're looking at world entity blocks, you know where that world entity block was in terms of chunk X, Y, and Z. Like the chunk X, Y, and Z is stored in a world chunk, and all the world blocks are off of a world chunk. So why would we then go ahead and store in the entity what its position was? Because we don't need that, right? And so I feel like we can get away with no longer storing this, right? Meaning we can still use the world position structure when we want to talk about a full world position, but instead in the actual entities themselves, right? We wouldn't need to store this world position at all, right? We could just get rid of it entirely, I think. And instead, just use the offset field in there inside the sim entity. We could just use, all we really need to store is just what the offset is from its chunk. That's the only piece of information we actually needed. Because the chunk X, Y, and Z will just be implicit when we iterate over them, right? And so I guess we do have one thing here where we try to store the invalid information in the world entities P struct or whatever there. But maybe can get rid of that too. I don't know. So let's just try it. I just want to try it and see if we can solve this puzzler, which we had set up way back from when we originally did world positions. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to flat out get rid of this, right? It's going away. I'm going to see what code actually used it. Okay, And something I do all the time, right? You just comment something out and see where all your compilers are. Now I know everyone who ever accessed it, right? So all right, change entity location.
I don't even remember where he had that stored. That was on the low entity. I see, which is in the game code, which is why I couldn't find it. Where was it? It was like, yeah, low. Okay, let's look at the low entity right here. And we'll try and build. And then we see all the same, basically the same errors that he's saying. Okay.
So all right, change entity location. Well, change entity location only accesses it to set it, basically, right? Let's see where it actually cares about that. It looks to see if it's valid, but we could get rid of that. Like I said, we could make it so that people have to pass in some additional thing if they want invalid things. So it seems like when we do change entity location raw, all we really needed to know is where they were before, right? So we don't need to store it. We would need to know what chunk they were in. So we need to know like where they came from, world chunk wise. But that's about it. So it would mean that when we do change entity location, we would have to pass in a old position, which we used to do, right? We used to pass in an old position, and we would have to do that again in order to do the removal. So do we care about that? Basically what it would mean is that our sim region, when we unpack our entities, right, we would have to store in the sim region something that allows us to get back to where the thing was, right? And I'm not sure that's a bad trade-off. That seems like something that might be totally fine. Yeah, I think I like that better. Basically, all it needs is it needs to know what the world chunk is to basically be able to remove this thing. And so we could just flat out store a pointer to whatever the world chunk was. Since we know that the low entity's in there, we know that the world chunk can't get removed. So we could just say that, when we do our sim entity, when we pull something out into simulation, we kind of just say, oh, we go ahead and say there's the world chunk, whichever chunk it was in. It's from this chunk, right? And then when somebody changes the location of an entity, they just pass in whatever the world chunk was where it used to be, right? So it would pass in a world chunk here. It would say this is where it's from, and then it would say where it wants it to be now. And we wouldn't really need this new p init thing anymore, probably. In fact, I don't actually know why it was doing it that way. Yeah, why was it doing it that way? I do not know why it was doing it that way. It's a bit wonky, to say the least. But there we go. So anyway, yeah, we pass a from chunk, or an old chunk, basically, right? And we could say this was old chunk as well. And yeah, and then we pass in the new p. Let's just go ahead and try that. We would get rid of the old p, new p thing. We would say, don't worry about that at all. And we don't really care about grabbing that old p out at all, I don't think. Yeah, I don't.
Okay, so real quick, just gonna I keep on just mistyping things, and then he moves on to another thing, and I'm like still trying to fix my typo, and I'm like, oh gosh, I'm getting lost here because he keeps moving forward. So we're gonna pass in that old chunk, and then it sounds like we'll get rid of, well, we probably still need to pass in, yeah, we still got to pass in the low entity, but then maybe we don't need this, or no, you probably still want to put in whatever location you want the entity to beam into, in particular if it was non-spatial before. Is that right? Feels right.
Think we care about this at all. We only really care about being able to set it to invalid. So I guess we'll leave that in the case that the new p was not valid that got passed in. So we'll change entity location raw to take the old chunk, and it'll just do that. That way.
Yeah, so we took this out, and you know what? That reminds me, weren't we making that check somewhere else? Non-spatial. Oh, well. Yeah, I don't know. Well, I guess it doesn't matter because we're not bothering with the old p anymore. Okay. And so instead of passing in the old p, we're passing in the old chunk, which may be the same as the new chunk, but we have to execute this code either way to see if it's actually, if the entity is moving out of this chunk and into a different one.
Doesn't have to do a lookup there anymore, so that actually saves us a hash lookup and a traversal too. Well, no, just a hash lookup, I guess. Saves us a hash lookup, so that's good. And then at the end, when we do the new P, assuming that that actually was correct, we don't have to store it back, I guess. All we have to do is in the low entities sim entity, its offset, I guess now, gets retained, right? So we would retain whatever that new P offset was. And that, I think, is about it. We don't have to initialize this at all. So I think that's it. And then when I go to change entity location raw, right?
No, hold on.
So I think that's it. And then when I go to
Hold the phone. Okay, so new P, that is a world position. Oh, I see. He's changing the sim entity's position on this thing's offset. Okay. What? Oh, okay. So he just gets rid of that, and that fixes that. But then this needs to take, and that's probably what he was about to change. No, it kind of looks like he already changed that. But point being that this is a pointer to one of them world chunk things. What now? Okay. Yeah, he's got to do something with this assert now.
world chunk, and this is the old chunk, like so. And we don't really have this assertion anymore. We would then have to say this code, actually, I guess, excuse me, gets a little more complicated because we can't actually ask about our in same chunk. Well, actually, I guess we can. If we have world chunk, that actually does have the information that we need, right? So if we go to, oops, that's in here. Yeah, that actually does that. So what we could do is say, if old chunk and new P are in same chunk, we can just pass old chunk there, and then are in same chunk, we just need another one of those, one that takes a world chunk.
Interesting. Well, that's going to be a new procedure group. And we'll just call it R in same chunk. Yeah. So pose and chunk pose are in same chunk, so that would compare two positions, although I don't know, like, would we even need, are we using that anywhere else? No. So maybe we can actually just get rid of the definition of this procedure, which compares two positions. I'll just comment out the original there. And then this would be chunk. Oh no, it's probably gonna call, well, would it need to do that? I feel like it wouldn't. Well, that was not what I meant to do. Oh man, what is it? It's chunk X, Y, and Z. I feel like it should just be this, right? We know they're the chunk X, Y, and Z because they're on a world chunk, so I'll just do that. And then this is just a position now. That first assert can go away, and then this is just going to be the position. Whoops. What the hell did I do? It's a typo. Okay. So I think this is basically how this will turn out, but we have another problem, which is that I need to update everywhere there was a chunk X, Y, and Z being accessed off one of these world chunks. That just simplifies things a little bit, I think. Makes them look a bit neater. Okay. Getting there. Just want to get all of these out of there. Wasn't a necessary change to get us moving forward here, but I just didn't like seeing it everywhere. Because if I see a world chunk, well, that's actually wrong. What's going on there? Yeah, that was dumb. That was fine the way it was. I didn't need to change that because that's off the world position. The position needs to know that it's a chunk X, Y, and Z and not like a tile X, Y, and Z. So I guess I'll just see about all of these other errors. We might have gotten rid of all the chunk reference errors. No, there's still a couple left, but not many. The heck? There we go. Yeah, see this? Now this call just looks a lot less crazy. Okay, so now I think we're good. Except everywhere where we're calling change entity location. Where is that? That's oops. I'm in the wrong file. So yeah, Casey's gonna have to fix that. He's gonna have to fix this. Well, I guess that's a good point. Is it just gonna be like a null chunk or something? Kind of seems that way.
Right. And it can still do basically the same thing, but now instead it just checks off of A. Pretty straightforward. That works exactly the same way, so that's good. So if that's the case, we don't really have to do anything about it, I guess. Then when we go in here, if there was an old chunk, then we just don't call get world chunk. We already know what it was, right? So we can just go ahead and say that chunk equals old chunk. That seems pretty straightforward, right? We don't even have to do an if, because we already did the if.
Ah, okay. That does seem a lot nicer. I didn't change that properly. So anywhere that there's an old P, let's just go ahead and if I can figure out how to type, we'll replace all of those to reference the old chunk. And then, like he said, chunk just equals old chunk. So that call just goes away entirely. And then we make sure it's not nil. And on we go. That gives us the first block, and then we can just dance on down in here. Okay.
So we can just get rid of that entirely, and that goes away. So there it is. Right? Bingo. Then we go ahead and check for new P. That handling should be exactly the same. I don't think anything changed there at all. So we just leave that the way it was. And that's it, right? I can't think of anything else particularly weird. Oops, gotta rename that because we kept that path in. So yeah, that seems about right. So when we do get simspace P, we have a slightly harder situation to deal with here, I suppose, because now we have to be able to pass this stuff properly. We have to be able to forward the chunk information on, right? So when we do get world chunk, when we do get simspace P, we want to pass that world chunk in so it can reconstruct where the guy should be. If that makes sense. Okay, so if we're going to do that, let's take a look at how that would function. So who are all the people that call get simspace P?
I don't even know. Was that in here? It was in here. Okay.
Want to take a look at them? So basically, if we load entity reference, we get one from the sim. We have to pull a low entity out. Darn. That's going to kill us, isn't it? I don't think there's any way we can fix that. Gah! Well, I tried. You know, I tried to solve the puzzler, but we couldn't solve it. So this is the thing that'll stop us. Basically, entity references will stop us, because the entity reference will not be able to figure out what chunk the entity is in, because it doesn't query by location. So sad. So sad. We almost did it, but we can't do it. So now we know. That's fine. We know that the puzzler can't be solved. Well, you know, maybe someday we'll still be able to solve it, but you know, for now anyway, unfortunately, it can't be solved. So let's go ahead and back that.
Interesting. So all because of the fact that some entities store a reference to other entities. In this case, the only instance that we have of this happening is with the player or hero entity having a reference to that sword, its weapon, whatever, which is itself treated as an entity, or not an entity, treated as an entity. It's just striking me as very odd. I guess I don't totally get why I suppose it's because it's just stored as an index, but yeah, it's just kind of weird because, well, I guess it would matter. I guess I'm only thinking of it in terms of the rock, which its position is kind of irrelevant if it isn't in play, right? But if an entity stores a reference to another entity, yeah, I guess that's what it is. But then if you did store the chunk on it, like we were starting to do, right over here, like, yeah, it's just kind of odd. I don't know why this stonewalled this change. It is sad because I had to think about this a bit harder than I would have expected to make that change. And of course, now I've got this chunk Z stuff bundled up in there, which was a bad idea. Thank you, hon. Love you. That was a perfect moment for my wife to bring me tea, because I was feeling bad about that. I was feeling bad about how I made this change. That's what I get. We're getting too ambitious. I just kind of worked a little bit too far ahead, but it's good that I could kind of see where he was going, and then, we kind of arrived at the same place before he saw that this change just can't happen the way that he wanted it to. I mean, we'll see. Like you said, it may still be solvable down the line, but for now, yeah, I almost want to go and solve that, but it's not super duper important, right? It's just kind of a crufty thing to have sitting around. But it's like the last vestige of the very original kind of throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks implementation of the layout of the world code and how we query tiles and pull entities in off of those tiles. It's crazy how much change it's all been through, and now how nice it is to work with that code without really thinking about it until you actually have to go and try and make a change like this, and then you're like, oh yeah, wait, we can't make that change. Like, it's just the levels of like disconnect from just like, there's a game world and I can conceptualize there's things in the world, but versus how those things are stored and like mechanically how all that works just for us to be able to do things efficiently in terms of like simulating entities and everything. It's all very like, I don't have a mental model for that in my head. If I started digging through the code, I could, kind of reverse engineer and start to articulate how it all works. But we've moved back and forth now enough at this point that a lot of that problem space that was inside of my head is just gone now. Anyway, that's too bad.
That out and be disappointed about it. At least I'm disappointed about it because I was kind of hoping we would be able to. But and by the way, I should also mention, this is not uncommon for me. I often try things like that just because I kind of want to oops, did I not restore that to its yeah, oops. That's not uncommon for me. I often like try something. I'm just like, I want to try this thing. And then eventually through the code somewhere you find out I can't do it, right? And that happens to me all the time. It's very, very common. But I still like to try because sometimes it does work. And you never really know until you try. It may be that you could have known that one. I don't know. That was kind of complicated. It's hard to remember all those sorts of things. So all right, so now we know. I'll write that here to do. It seems like we have to store chunk x, y, z with each entity because even though the sim region gather doesn't need it at first, and we could get by without it, entity references pull in entities without going through their tile chunk, or I should say world chunk, and thus still need to know the chunk x, y, z. All right, well, it's sad. It's sad. I wish we had an owl of disappointment to go with our owl of shame. We don't, but if we did, it would be flapping its little wings right now. All right, well, I know what to do down, though. So we are making progress on the things we wanted to do this week. And let's take a look at what we have next. Which one of these two we want to do? So
just finish typing in this to do before he moves on. Yeah, I mean, that to do sums it all up, and I don't know. It seems like it should be as simple as just persisting. Well, I guess the whole point is that we need to get rid of this. And if we persist it somewhere else, right? Like if it's not here, then we have to still record that information somewhere else. That doesn't solve the problem. We've still got this right here, and that's no good. So, yeah. I don't know. The problem is not substantial or interesting enough to warrant figuring out how to fix it, right? Because it may not be fixable, after all. If I can't do it, I'm sure as heck not going to do it where Casey couldn't in any reasonable amount of time.
Minkowski inclusion test for sim region begin updatable bounds. That's pretty easy. We might as well do that. Let's go ahead and continue that because that's a good progress towards Z. And then maybe tomorrow will be our day where we start working on this up and down situation because that's really a thing where we're kind of have to put on our for instance caps and have a bunch of for instances. Like for instance, I'm going upstairs. For instance, I want to go into a cave. For instance, I want to see a boss that's below me on a lower floor. You know, for instances. You know what I'm talking about, right? For instances. Maybe you don't. But anyway, so Minkowski inclusion testing, that's pretty easy. And it's not even really, you don't even have to do Minkowski. We'll talk about this because it doesn't even have to be phrased in terms of Minkowski. But basically all I'm talking about is we have currently inside our sim region this concept of the entity gather where we go through, in fact it's right here, right? We go through all of the things in the world that are within a certain boundary, and we basically ask like what, you know, for all of the entities here, which of them overlaps this boundary, and those are the ones that we're going to put into this simulation, right? It's a spatially bounded simulation, and we did that because we know we can't simulate all the entities in the world at a time, so we're just simulating them in little geographic regions, so that they can like interact with each other in that region, and then we can simulate other regions and so on. Now, the problem with the code that we wrote, and the reason I said we should update it just to kind of be a little bit cleaner about it, problem with the code that we wrote is that currently it doesn't actually respect the concept that entities themselves have a size. And so what was happening before, and this has nothing to do with Z specifically, this was true even when we weren't talking about Z, but it makes sense to handle it in Z as well because we also want to start talking about entities in this way as well. Essentially, you can imagine our entities, right, have some kind of boundary that we could talk about. And since we're mostly working with, we've been working with sort of right rectangular prisms here, we've been working with, you know, things that are like a cube but stretched. I don't know what you call boxes, right? Or AABBs we've been working with, axis aligned bounding boxes, right? Axis aligned bounding boxes. We've been working with these, and you know, we've been doing some stuff, like our collision sort of works properly with them, and we do some stuff that respects the bounding boxes, and our entities right now have a width and a height, right? But they should also now have a depth. So that's one thing that we need to add, which is the concept that entities have like an actual, you know, size. So we should probably change this concept to be a v3 in the entity that basically stores their dimensions along all three axes, right? That makes sense. But the other thing that we should do is in that gather, we should use this now to see whether entities overlap our gather region. So if this is our gather region, and there's an entity that's right there, well, its center point might be here, but its bounds extend all through, you know, three-dimensional space, right? Its bounds extend outward. And right now, when we do our inclusion test, all we're doing is we're just testing the position. And we're seeing whether that position falls within this boundary. Now, that doesn't really help us very much, because we could have an entity that should be in the boundary, but that's not being counted because of this, especially if the energy was somewhat large. So what we'd like to do is we'd like to do our inclusion test to test against overlapping with these other, with these other rectangles, right? And so we already know one way that we could do this, right? We could do this with the Minkowski, which is basically we take whatever this distance is here, and we add it on to either side, right, of this rectangle, and we take whatever this distance is here, and we add it on to this one, right? So that we produce a new testing rectangle, and then we just test against the point. That's one way we could do it. But we could also choose to do it another way, which is just to do an overlap test to see whether the two rectangles overlap. And honestly, at 6 of one, half dozen of the other, I don't know that it really matters which way we do it, but we have to do one of those. We have to do something. We also have a related problem. And this one I don't know if we're going to try and solve or not, right? But what that problem is right now we have tile chunks, right? We've got these tile chunks. And the tile chunks store our entities, right? So when we do a gather, so here's our gather region, what we are currently doing is we're looping over all the tile chunks that our gather region touches, right? So we're looping over these 9, squares, right? We're looping over this one, this, and saying, give me all the entities in there, then test them against the rectangle. That's how we're doing our gather, to avoid testing all the entities in the world every time, which would be prohibitively expensive with the number of entities we're going to have. But what if there was an entry in this up here? So this guy, right, this tile chunk is not counted. But there's an entity here who just has a really large bound, right? He's very big. Or, perhaps more likely, imagine if instead of being here, our gather region were aligned more poorly, right? Because the gather region's allowed to be anywhere it wants. We're not placing restrictions on how the camera moves at the moment. The camera can move anywhere it wants. So suppose instead my gather region is right here, right? That includes these guys. It does not include this tile chunk, because it's on the other side. The gather region starts on the other side of the tile chunk. So if there was a guy who's right on the edge and who isn't particularly large, he's only that big, he still won't show up, right? He won't be tested. He won't even be looked at, right? It's not that he'll fail the test, because we could write the test properly so that it would say he was in, but we'll never actually even iterate over him because he's stored in this tile chunk, not this tile chunk. And this is the first tile chunk that we start using, right? So there's multiple ways we can approach that problem. And I think I'll probably take oh, excuse me. Oh, I'm tired tonight. It's yawning here. The problem is that we have to solve it either in the spatial partition, either in the tile chunks themselves, or in our gather. And the way that we would solve it in the tile chunks is, for example, we could double store our entities. So for example, any entity that straddled a tile chunk could just go ahead and be stored in both tile chunks, right? Totally fine, no big deal. The other way we can do it is in our entity gather, we can displace the entity gather. We can say, let's expand it by the radius of our largest entity, right? Because that's how far it could extend over, and that would guaranteedly get it. So what are the pros and cons here? Why would we choose one or the other? Well, expanding the gather, right? If we were going to expand the gather, that is the problem of it has to handle the maximum entity radius, right? If all our entities are similarly sized, totally fine, because it really wouldn't be a problem, no big deal. But what if we have a giant entity? So what if at one point we have an entity that's like 12 screens large? I don't know how we do that or why, but let's say we did. Well, now this is really bad because now our gather region has to gather tons more tile chunks every time, looking for a giant entity, even if there's no giant entity anywhere near where we're gathering, right? So it's a huge waste of resources all the time. So that's the problem. That's the thing that it does not do well, right? This is the bad part. On the other hand, double stores, right? Or I should say multi-stores, are the opposite. Basically, what they are is if we have similarly sized entities, if we have mostly similarly sized entities, right? So if we have mostly entities that are all the exact same size, and now we're just storing all of these entities doubly all the time, we're just wasting a ton of work storing and pulling things out of our store just to handle that once or twice where we have that giant entity, right, if we ever do. Now, if we actually do have that giant entity, then maybe this was a win, because we don't have to do this expansion all the time. But we do have this problem where, like, okay, if mostly we're never actually taking advantage of that, then really all we did, if we never have that single giant entity, right, if all entities are small, then this was a total lose, right? And we don't really know which of these two we have. It's not clear. So I'm not sure. But that's basically the way that works, is they're two trade-offs, and we don't really have very much information with which to make that trade-off. So I think what I'll probably do is I'm going to do the simpler of the two, right? Because when you have no information, you might as well do the one that's least likely to cause bugs and be a strain on the code. So instead of worrying about storing things and removing things from the space partition overlapping, let's just go ahead and introduce a maximum entity radius, right? We already have a safety margin, and we'll have a max entity radius. And we'll just say that we've got whatever this is. The maximum entity radius is like 5 meters or something. And then our sim regions will just get updated by whatever that is. So we'll say, add radius 2. We'll do that bounds there, and we'll say, in fact,
I don't know what happened. I'm looking at the code and I don't see the things that I feel like I should be seeing. Oh, well, yeah, I'm in the totally wrong place. That would explain it. I like saw enough code that was similar to where I was like, I'm in the right place. Nope. Okay, so yeah, this is right. So we get our sim region out. It's already zeroed. This update margin thing, I guess I could do it like this. And that feels a bit more clean, I guess. And then max entity radius. Yeah, how did he do that? Did he just... Yeah, he just created a vector 3 with the... That's right, the safety margin stuff. Yeah, that's why I did that way. Okay, yeah, because he wanted the option to just tweak the Z. And to be fair, I mean, you could just say update safety margin, you know, Z is whatever. But this way, like, I can just do it in place. Okay, so let me do that over. So we'll leave that alone. I don't know why there's a random capital R in there. And then we have our max entity radius of 5, but and
I also want to make sure it's not bounds. Bounds. It's not. So we'll go ahead and just say that that's going to be the max entity radius, max entity radius, max entity radius. That way we just enlarge that collision region there, and off we go. Now what we also can do is we can also say we can make this a global thing, right? And we could sort of say that we try to prevent there from ever being a case where we know about an entity that's going to be larger than that or something like this. So that's an entity that's 10 meters large, right, which is pretty big. But, you know, maybe someday we accidentally forget and we create one larger than that. So it would be nice to sort of, and it looks like I've even got a thing here, calculate this eventually from the maximum value of all entity radius plus their speed. So we know that the update.
Why don't I have that to do? Must have been goofing off that day or something. I don't know. Just make sure. When something hasn't gone wrong for a whole hour, I start getting paranoid that something's gone wrong and I haven't noticed it. Like the stream is just off. And somehow I am ignorant of this fact, but everything looks okay. Or maybe he just added that. I don't know.